So these presentations have been great. I'm sorry I missed the very beginning of the first one. We made the mistake of trying. We wanted to get the board members here, and it's great that Catherine Moore is here from our board. So we had the board meetings. We're kind of doing double duty this morning, but I'm really looking forward to the rest of these presentations. And you all have done spectacular work, and it's really an important part of what the Pulitzer Center does, and to be involved with your great universities and colleges, community colleges, and all that brings to us in terms of raising the level of what our professional journalism does, and exposing us to ideas and issues that we wouldn't otherwise hear about. So it's great to have you here. I hope you have a great weekend. And I'll turn it back to Kat.
For those who may not know, John forgot to say he's the director of the center. And now we'll get started.
Great.
And I guess just one more thing. This is our human rights panel.
Okay, so we are going to start with just playing a little bit of sound. I'm Rebecca Gibeon, and this is. It says it's on. Maybe it's not. Is it on? Oh, it's on now. Hi, everyone. Okay, so I'm Rebecca. This is Diana. And we went to Costa Rica to report on the indigenous community called the Bribri. To start, I'm just going to play a quick minute of sound from my audio piece, if I can find the mic. Okay. To get to the Bribri village, you have to take at least 2 buses and then a motorized canoe. Nestled along the Panamanian border, this indigenous community has chosen to live in isolation for hundreds of years. There are just under 12,000 of Costa Rica's hidden people in the mountains of Talamanca. And although their population is stable, their traditions are not. The older generations say that cell phones are distracting children from school. There has not been a graduating high school class since 2010. Okay, so that's kind of the basic idea behind our project. So Diana's going to start off by telling you a little bit about why we originally went to Costa Rica and what we ended up coming back with.
So our original pitch was about deforestation in Costa Rica, and it's definitely occurring, but when we got there, we interviewed people, we did our background research, we were so sure that the place we were going was going to be affected by this, but as so many things work out, this way. We got there and there just wasn't a way for us to actually make it to the people and the location that was occurring. So we had about 30 minutes.
This is what we looked like during the 30 minutes of terror.
Yeah. So we had about 30 minutes to figure out, okay, we have to make decisions. Are we going to walk 3 days into the rainforest and maybe make it to another village where people can talk to us about deforestation? Or are we going to find another story? So we decided to stay where we already were, and that led us to asking the community members, what's going on in your community? What's bothering you? What's affecting you? So the village called Yorkine had about 280 people in it, and we found out pretty quickly that the influx of technology from nearby villages was very negatively affecting the education system in this village. So people not being interested in school, downloading pornography, people being distracted, people being influenced from there.
So one of the main issues is that Costa Rica implemented a nationwide education system a long time ago in order to try and assimilate the indigenous peoples into the Costa Rican culture. But the issue with that, as a lot of experts and one of our main experts, who's a professor of anthropology at the University of Costa Rica, explained, is that it almost puts one foot in the door of Costa Rican culture and one foot in the door of Bribri culture. So these kids don't really feel like they're learning enough information about either cultures to be a member of one or the other community. So they're learning enough Costa Rican culture to be interested in that and almost interested in this more westernized version, but meanwhile back home their parents are telling them to not be interested in any sort of body modification such as tattoos or piercings or short haircuts. They're supposed to learn their Bribri language, but most of them don't, and most of them just aren't interested in it because instead they can now use these phones to kind of connect them with this outside world. So a lot of the main leaders of the community feel like they're losing their culture, and they feel like school is the most important key to the culture. But in fact, it's this weird dichotomy where school could also be hurting their culture. So there's no real answer to this issue, because while technology is infiltrating and it is changing it, school is also doing the same thing. They just kind of refuse to acknowledge that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add as well that it kind of gives insight into how insidious technology can be, because there isn't a bomb going off. There isn't someone dying in the road. It's this sort of slow seeping thing where it creeps into their culture. It's you're walking through a jungle where there's no electricity, where there's no one for miles, but you hear the sound of a Jay-Z song coming out of somebody's MP3 player, right? So it's this odd thing where you just see these hundreds of years of culture slowly sort of ebbing away. And it was a very interesting thing to observe. And like we said, I mean, technology is definitely not the only reason that people are dropping out of school. It's a very complex thing, but certainly it was interesting to see what the unanticipated effects of an iPhone can be.
It was also interesting because, so these kids, the cell reception, as Diana said, there's no electricity in most of this village of Yurkin. The lights, when it gets dark, that's your light, so you go to bed. The kitchen has a fire pit that's how they cook their food. But then these kids are walking around with music blaring, and our fixer had visible tattoos that we asked if they should cover, and they were fine with us having them, but these kids are very interested. So they would walk up to our fixer and say, oh, what's this one mean? Or what's this one mean? And they were interested by our nose piercings. They're very interested in this outside world. But then as soon as the older generation hears about it, they're very quickly to put them in their place. And all of the parents will say, oh, technology is really dangerous. I don't let my kids use it. And then the kids are sitting on their phones using the technology with their books open. So it's a very strange world, and nobody really knows what to do. Nobody knows what the answer is, because the generation is going, the upcoming generation likes phones, the outgoing generation doesn't. So what's the answer?
Yeah, so now we can go ahead and move on to, we wanted to share with you some of the things that we learned throughout this, because this was a really challenging trip. There was a lot of things we ran into. So if you want to just talk about a couple of the things.
Sure. When Diana and I were talking about giving this presentation, we definitely wanted to tell you about our story and about all of the work that we did, because that's why we were there. But also just kind of wanted to have this intentional time to say that this was really hard, and that we hope we're not the only ones, and that we're very amazed by everything that we've seen and are going to see tomorrow, I'm sure. But hope that we can also talk about the fact that being a student journalist, and this was not our first time abroad. Diana and I have been lucky enough to travel to 5 countries together over the past year and report from all of them, and this was still difficult. So we just kind of wanted to say a couple of quick things about what we learned. We had this weird situation where we accidentally hired 2 fixers and needed to pay both of them eventually, so that was a thing. We should have thought more clearly about the fact that there was no electricity and brought charged equipment, but not fully charged, and then all of our equipment died.
I'd like to talk about shampoo. We went to 5 different locations, and I know this because a bottle of shampoo and conditioner is about $5, and I spent about $25 on shampoo and conditioner, because every place we would go, I would leave it by accident, and it kind of became a joke. I remember we were leaving the village, and Rebecca goes, "Hey, you got the shampoo right?" And I was like, "Yeah, haha, stop." No, I left it there.
For the 4th time.
For the 4th time, and I kept having to buy bottles of shampoo, which sounds ridiculous, and it was not very fun at the time. I was hoping that I was going to laugh about it later, and it's still expensive. It's the most money I've ever spent on shampoo in my life.
So basically, a couple notes that we wanted to share, and hopefully you can all tell us how to be good journalists as well, is use other journalists in your life to help you. We are so thankful to the Pulitzer Center. Tom actually helped us get the 2nd fixer, so thank you and also not thank you to Tom for that. But we had Nick Miroff, who was an old-time Pulitzer grantee, who emailed us like every few days to check in and see how we were doing. Any other journalist we met was so willing and kind and ready to talk to us and help us out. So definitely like use the resources that you have. Take advantage of those who you have around you. We lived in South Africa this summer, and so just did not have the opportunity to set up as many interviews and things as we could have. And so that was a big tip for us, is next time we do this, definitely setting things up before. We had a few things set up before the country, but not enough. And we should have done that a little more. 2 weeks flies by.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on state of mind. I was going to piggyback off of what you just said. Because we were in another country beforehand, it was so hard to get geared up for this. And since so many of you are going to be traveling, and whether that's for journalism or something else that's different, it's just really important to get your mind in the place that you need it to be, because we were so worried about like flying home from South Africa and then seeing our families for a little bit and then going to Costa Rica. And it just, in the future, I know we will take away from this that like getting into the zone that you need to be, that gets you there, that says, okay, like, do I have everything? Because if you do that, then you won't do things like have to buy 5 bottles of shampoo and conditioner.
So please ask us about the brie, but also give us advice.
Yes. Thank you so
Here's
much.
a cell phone in the middle of the rainforest.
And thank you so much to Pulitzer for giving us this opportunity, because it was an incredible learning experience, and I just will definitely never forget it. So.
Hi everyone, my name is Julia Bacano. I'm one of 2 fellows from American University. It's American University's first kind of trial with the Campus Consortium program, so I'm really excited to be along with Kara and represent AU, which is right down the street, up the street, however you look at it. So I looked at the transgender community in Thailand, and before before I get started, I kind of want to explain how I even thought of this project, because I think it is a really interesting story and very time relevant into what's going on in the movement of gender equality. I should probably change this. So I mean this picture is just an example of how time relevant it was with the whole Caitlyn Jenner thing. And this was taken, so these are pictures of a profile I did, and she's a transgender model, and it was just ironic that she put the photos on the magazine, the Vanity Fair, which debuted when I was over there. And I just thought it was really interesting contrast between how Americans view transgender rights and access and things like that, and how Thai people do. So when I was thinking of things to pitch to the Pulitzer Center, I was trying to think of, again, like what's underreported, how can I extend the conversation of something that's happening in the United States to a global perspective? And so I was thinking, and I was talking to journalists on the ground, and they said, really look into the LGBT community. And I was like, oh, I had never thought to look at that issue in Thailand. I really didn't know anything about it besides, I guess, what everybody knows about it. And so I saw a trend in the United States. Laverne Cox at the time was the first actress to win an Emmy nomination. She's from Orange is the New Black, Emmy nomination. I was like, that kind of put the transgender movement on the eyes of many Americans. And I thought that was interesting. And then right as I was pitching the story, Bruce Jenner, now Caitlyn Jenner, announced that he was transitioning into a woman. And that sold me. I knew that it was just very interesting, because both of these people who were putting this issue on the minds of many Americans were both Western and American celebrities. And I thought it was really interesting to look at the issue beyond that of a Western scope, because we do tend to Americanize things. The mainstream media does do that. So that's kind of where I found my topic, and I wanted to continue it because I wanted to hear, again, celebrities kind of skew the movement and things like that. And they definitely are important in terms of bringing awareness to the issue. But I definitely wanted to hear the unheard voices and get the real story. How are people abroad doing this? And so the reason I chose Thailand is because I learned that it has a very, very high prevalence of the transgender community there. Ironically, no study has been done to count the number of transgender people living there, but estimates do say it's about 1 in 300 people or 1 in 3,000 people. And actually there's a study being conducted right now to actually find out how many transgender people are there. And this is just a preface, when I'm speaking about transgender, I focus simply on transitioning from male to female. They're definitely more prevalent in terms besides women to men. I'm not sure exactly why that is. That's definitely another research question to play with. But so if you look and you Google LGBT community in Thailand on Google, you'll see tons of articles, especially from CNN, saying, go to Thailand, it's an LGBT paradise. They're known as the sex change capital of the world because more than any country in the world, they perform the most sex reassignment surgeries than anywhere in the world, which I thought was very interesting. It's actually, so it goes Thailand and then Iran is the second country to produce the most, which I thought that was really interesting, especially because they're a very conservative society. So that's kind of what grew my attention. And they're home to the best surgical clinics and surgeons for this transitioning process, the sex reassignment process and things like that. So that's kind of why I chose Thailand. And before going into like talking about what I did and who I talked to, I kind of want to go over some conclusions I arrived to after being there for a month, just because Thai culture, I've never been, when I went to go in there, I don't speak Thai, and to navigate the Thai culture, Asian culture, is very complex, and there's layers and layers of complexity and dynamics that I'm not used to. And so I think it's worth to kind of note and remember that it was probably 75% of my trip was done, and I still didn't understand what was going on. And that's kind of when I started to panic. I was like, oh my God, I'm not gonna get a story. And I'm sure many of you felt that way as well, but Thai culture, I cannot emphasize, is so confusing. Thai people don't understand it. One of my mentors is Thai and he doesn't understand it. And my argument is if he doesn't understand it, I'm not gonna understand it. It's gonna be difficult. So anyways, again, it's very over community, and I want to emphasize that just because it's overt doesn't mean the people are accepted. Going back to the culture, it's a very non-violent culture. There's no instances of hate violence. And so I think this could be completely wrong, but I think there's a high prevalence of the trans community there because people feel comfortable coming out because they know that they're not going to be hit in the street or killed, as in other places that's not necessarily true. And so I think that's kind of why it goes back to the high prevalence of the people. And Thailand in general has a very superficial understanding. Yes, because there's no hate violence, people seem accepted because they're allowed to walk in the streets and there's so many people there. There's so many male to female people. And that was another thing I kind of had to grapple with, was because at its core, these people are not accepted at all. And I found that in terms of employment, which I'll explain in a little bit. And other things I found really interesting was that the more beautiful you are, the more that you fit into one of two gender boxes, that being, if you look like a male, then you're accepted. If you look like a female, then you're accepted. But if you look like they call them katoys, in Thai it means lady boys. If you look like a lady boy, which is kind of like the in-between, you're a male, but you didn't have the surgery yet, and you took hormones, and you have like the long hair and things like that, you're completely isolated from mainstream society. And I think it's also important to emphasize is that it's very difficult to identify who is and who isn't transgender, which kind of goes back to, we don't know how many people there are there, because the people that do transition and do the surgeries and things like that, I couldn't tell you if they were born male or born female. That's how good the surgery is, and that's how they really they seem like physically women. So I thought that was interesting, and that the more beautiful you are, the more accepted you are into society. which I think can be said about maybe other places as well. And not surprisingly, the more educated you are, the more likely you are to say you're marginalized. I think that's, education goes a long way, and that when you know of the world and you know what exists outside your sphere and your society, you can kind of compare your experience to other experiences. So a lot of people I talked to were, they ranged from academics, professors, to sex workers and things like that. And I found that the sex workers were definitely more inclined to say that they were marginalized, or not, I'm sorry, not marginalized, because they don't know what's out there for them, essentially. And the trans people in general have to go above and beyond to prove their worth to society. And in Thailand, the way you prove your worth is through financial payback to your family. So as your parents get older, it's kind of required culturally for you to provide financial payback to your family as they get older. And if you don't, that's like a big sore within society. Like, you will be looked down upon, which poses a problem in terms of employment, because if you don't have a job, you can't pay your family, which means you can't, gain acceptance within society. So with that said, I'm going to talk about one particular person. Sorry, I'm just struggling to turn this page. Her name's Bei Tong. Let's see if I can find her. Nope. There she is. So she's a 28-year-old trans woman. She's 24, and she had dreams of becoming a lawyer, but cannot, because she refuses to wear the male uniform associated with being a lawyer in Thai court, which means that she cannot even step foot in Thai court, because cross-dressing, quote unquote, is illegal in Thailand, and you can be punished and sent to jail for that. So she wants to be a lawyer, but cannot be a lawyer because she can't enter court and can't do a job. So you're probably asking, why did she even try to enter this society, like this formal job market in the first place? Which is that she didn't think it was going to be that bad. She saw people around her, and that they weren't people. You can get a job as a cosmetologist, or very informal jobs. So when it comes to getting a job as an engineer, a lawyer, things like that, you're completely isolated. And the only reason why she was able to get a junior lawyer position in the first place was that because her family has connections into Thai court and essentially got her the job, but she cannot progress at all. And she's well qualified. She graduated from the equivalent of Harvard and still cannot get a job. Graduated top of her class, well qualified. And when she went into interviews, people wouldn't ask her about her proficiency of working. All they cared about was whether she passed the operation or not, which means essentially, did she get a sex change? And I think we can all agree that's kind of inappropriate to ask in a professional setting like that. And so I found that interesting. And just to end on one quote that really stuck with me from Bei Tong. She said, "For me, I want to be a lawyer, but I can't do it. I know there are a lot of transgenders that their career is different from the general path. Maybe transgenders want to be an engineer, a lawyer, or for me, a prosecutor, but they can't do it even though they have a strong proficiency. So the attitude must be changed." And that kind of goes back to the inner core of Thailand, that superficially and from the outside, it seems like these people are accepted. But really, when it comes to attitudes, these people aren't able to progress, even if they're qualified. And just to wrap up real quick, her solution to not being able to progress to the field of her dreams is to leave Thailand altogether, go to the United Kingdom. She's going to business management school and getting a whole different degree, and doesn't have plans to return to Thailand. So she had to completely just leave her country. And so I have a lot more to say, but I know I'm going to run out of time. So thank you.
Okay, hi guys, my name's Anna. I'm from Kent State University, which is in northeastern Ohio, for those of you who don't know. I did my project in Ireland on the Irish language, which to talk about for just a moment. I know that I at least got a lot of questions about the language when I said I'm studying Irish speakers. People are like, oh, you mean Gaelic? But the language is Irish. And so I asked a lot of people while I was there, all the Irish speakers who I spoke with. So one of my first questions to all of them was, why do you think Americans call it Gaelic? Because I grew up my whole life thinking that it was, and it's not. And so a lot of them said that the reasoning is probably because to say Irish in Irish, the term is Gaelga, and it's spelled Gaeilge. And so if you read it in English, it kind of looks like Gaelig. So they think that that might be where it comes from. But just to discuss that first off, the language is Irish. And so Irish is considered the first national language of Ireland, but only about 1.8% of people speak it daily. And fewer than half of the population, about 45%, say that they have some capacity to speak it. That's based off of census data, so of course there could be some overestimating or underestimating language qualifications, not totally sure, but that's pretty abysmal because everyone is required to learn Irish in school. So this is Eddie here, and he went through the school system in Ireland, and he said, you know, something is direly wrong if after 14 years people are leaving school without being able to speak Irish. And so what I want to talk about first is kind of how the situation was that led up to what it is now, how it is now, and then kind of looking towards the future of what might be changing. So in the past, Irish wasn't really promoted by the government. It's considered the first national language, but one of the people I spoke with, who was the language officer at Trinity College in Dublin, she said that the Irish school system was really good at impressing upon people the idea that they were supposed to, and that they were supposed to be fluent in Irish, but not good at actually making them fluent in Irish. So everyone left school just feeling really guilty, like they were supposed to, but they were never able to learn it. Eddie said that a lot of people remember having it like literally beaten into them by the teachers in schools, and that it was really taught kind of like Latin as like a dead language. You didn't speak it outside of school, you memorized your conjugations, you passed your exam, and then once you left, no more. So that was also the case for Robert here. Robert also was not able to speak Irish after leaving school. He said he loved it, he loved the language, and he loved learning it, but it wasn't fashionable, and people looked down on you if you spoke Irish, so he never spoke it outside of school. And his story really was that he came to America. He was living in California for a while. His wife was going to school at Berkeley, and he was in a theater company, and they were doing a play by Sean O'Casey, who's an Irish playwright. And the person came up to him, the director of the play, and said, I want you to do this piece in your own language. And he said that is the most ashamed he had ever been in his life, and that he just felt so guilty because he didn't have his own language. And going off of this point, there's this wonderful phrase that when people say that they speak Irish, they don't say I speak Irish, they say I have Irish, which I think is really kind of symbolic of the way that Irish speakers feel about their language. Really beautiful. So what he did is actually went to a professor at Berkeley and said, I want you to teach me as much as you can. I need to know Irish. You know, he could remember a little bit, but not much, even after 14 years of school. And so he performed in that play, and he spoke that monologue in Irish, and he was very proud of that. And so then afterwards, he said he made it his life goal to be able to speak Irish fluently. And now he's in a conversation circle at Trinity College in Dublin. He's writing a novel in Irish. So he's just a really great story. So that's kind of how the situation was. And the situation now is that the government has made a lot of plans to help Irish become actually the official language. But I spoke with Angela, who is from Inishmore, which is one of the Gaeltacht areas in Western Ireland. These are the areas with the highest population of native Irish speakers. And she said that the government seems like they want to get rid of Irish speakers. And this is kind of this thing that I kept hearing. There's a 20-year plan for the Irish language that was created, all these kinds of government things where they're saying, do this, here are some laws, here are some rules, but people aren't really following them. And sometimes they're actually hurting it. Someone I spoke with at the Gaelic League, he actually said that he calls it bail gra, which in Irish means mouth love, like if translated literally. And it's this idea of like lip service where like they're going to talk the talk, but when they make policy, it's without full knowledge needed to actually implement a good policy that helps these people. So there was a report by the Irish Language Commissioner, and out of, for instance, if you're a public body, you have to have services available to any Irish speaker who calls. And so one of those things is that if they receive an answering machine message, it has to be available in English and in Irish, and it has to say the same thing. And out of about 30 bodies that they looked at, only 2 were compliant. So once again, these laws exist, but if people aren't following them, is it helping the Irish speakers? And once again, the language officer who I spoke with at Trinity said she kind of finds it to be this vicious circle where the government says, well, nobody's asking, so why would we put money into that anyways? But the people who speak Irish don't ask because they know it's going to take too long. And they, these are oftentimes pressing matters if you're calling the government for something. So because of this, it's often left up to the communities to kind of promote the language. If the government's not doing it, somebody has to. And it ends up being the Irish speakers. And so this was Radi and Alife, which is in Dublin, which has a decently high concentration of Irish speakers, not necessarily native Irish speakers. So this was a volunteer-run radio station. I think they had about 100 employees and only 3 of them were paid. And so all of these people still come here and put in, huge amounts of efforts for these radio shows because they know that this, for some people, this is one of the only ways that they get to keep their Irish. And so that was definitely the case with the station manager, Cian, and he said, if I hadn't found out about this, I wouldn't be able to speak Irish anymore. And so like he almost completely lost his language, totally found the station by chance. He was just looking for some good music. He was in a band and he was like, I wanted to play music, and I found a good community with people who listen to the music that I like, and then it actually ended up helping him save his language. This was the conversation circle that I said Robert was a part of. These are really popular. You can look up, there are like full websites where you can go through and find conversation circles in your area. So that's another really cool thing. But the thing is that for most people, this is once a week for 30 minutes. And a lot of the people I talked to, along with Robert, were like, well, it's great and I love having this, but 30 minutes once a week is not enough for me to grow. Maybe I keep it at what it is, but I'm not really growing in my skills. And I'm running out of time, so I won't get too deep into this because this is a pretty big topic. But also, I went to Belfast and a Gael school up there. And Gael school are schools that are completely taught in Irish the entire time. So typically, even if you go in knowing no Irish, you leave completely fluent. And so it's definitely a different situation in Northern Ireland. As I said, I can't get too much into it because I don't have much time, but this I think was like just one of the best quotes. It was from Eddie, the storyteller he saw at the very beginning. And he said, where you have a lack of resentment, you have hope. The schools obviously created a lot of resentment, but if we can become proud of the language, then it'll survive. If the people who already speak it can become proud of it, it'll survive. And he said, the day that we let Irish go, we're really in trouble. And so I think that was just really, most of the people I spoke with there were just really scared that this language was not going to be passed down. So some of the people who learned it, even if they weren't native speakers, said, I'm 100% going to pass this down to my children because I want this to stay. And then just really quickly on matters of being a journalist, my article was published in the World Post, which is part of the Huffington Post, and I was on Huffington Post Live. which was super nerve-wracking for me because like right now I'm sweating. I'm not used to being in front of the camera. I'm not used to being the one being interviewed. I'm the one who's supposed to be doing the interviews, and I'm not even actually trained as a journalist necessarily. I'm not in the J School program. So it's always kind of been something where it's like, I really like journalism, but I'm kind of nervous. So once again, just like a huge thank you to Pulitzer for giving me the support and, kind of like helping me like believe like you're on the right path, keep going, and so it's been awesome. And thank you.
Alrighty, hi y'all. First of all, thank you to the Pulitzer Center for making this possible, and also fantastic job, guys. I've just been impressed all day. Really, really fantastic work. And so, without further ado, my name is Sydney Combs, and I am a recent graduate of the University of Chicago. And for my project with the Pulitzer Center, I worked on a multimedia piece looking at how Maasai women in northern Tanzania were banding together to fight and disprove harsh stereotypes against businesswomen. And the goal in this project was to show how women in strict patriarchal societies, while disadvantaged, yes, are impossibly resourceful and are constantly negotiating and renegotiating the roles in society. And so this all started back in 2013 when I went to the same village I worked at this time and did a brief ethnographic study looking at Maasai perceptions on female entrepreneurship. And at that time, most everyone, men and women, disapproved of women selling anything more than extra milk in the rainy season at the market. But over the years, and it was happening then and even more so now, there are new taxes, there's new there are increasing droughts, there's diminishing land access due to conservation, and so men are becoming unable to provide for their one or multiple families, depending on how many wives they have. And so women are placed in this impossible position where either they break tradition and they start businesses, or either they break tradition or they follow tradition and face, backlash. And so while I was doing my project, I started to target, back in 2013, I started to target these rogue businesswomen, asking who they were and why they were making these decisions or what consequences they were facing. And so during this time, I heard a lot of really ingenious stories of how women were selling goods, despite their husbands' wishes, backlash, and lack of resources. And in particularly bad situations, when husbands find out that their wives are selling goods, they will beat their wives, confiscate their profits, and forbid them from ever doing work again. And so women were, because of this threat, they were doing their businesses in secret, hidden from their husbands. And so, but while I was doing the project, I noticed that all of these businesses relied on help from a fellow woman, like a co-conspirator that was helping them sell goods at the market if they were unable to, or helping them hide goods in each other's homes when their husbands came home, because sometimes husbands are away for weeks at a time. And so this time around, when I went back, my project ended up focusing or hovering around this lady named Sipape Lekisamba. She's 60 years old, and she's a veteran businesswoman. And so she's very familiar with all these problems that women face when going and selling goods. And she argues that men don't want their women selling goods because they're, quote, jealous. And they're worried that if a woman leaves their home, then they will have an affair, or they'll resort to prostitution in order to make money. But Lekisamba herself is a widow, and so she's never had to fight for her independence so close to home. She sells tobacco powder, so she'll buy whole tobacco leaves and pound it and prepare it so people can sniff it. And then this whole business carries a lot of burden in itself. It's physically demanding. It makes her and her family sick because the tobacco dust hangs in the air and they cough and sometimes they throw up. It's quite rough. And then also it's time consuming, and the closest market is 2 hours away by foot. the next closest market she has to get to by bus, and that takes hours, and it's also really expensive. She almost doesn't make any profit with the transportation costs. And so over the course of several interviews, like Isama kept saying things like, oh, these women that don't do businesses, they just sit at home with nothing to do. And that seemed really absurd to me, because Maasai women, without a business, they are they're in charge of the home, and so they have constant and exhausting chores. They fetch firewood and water, often 2 hours away. They take care of newborn livestock, all of the children in the entire boma, like Isama's boma is like 12 little ones that are like constantly in everyone's hair. And they milk the cattle, they build the houses, they tend the gardens, which provide a lot of their food. It's a busy day. So even if a woman has a supportive husband or is a widow, starting a business isn't an easy thing to do, but it's a necessity for many of them. And so to help, you have local politicians and NGOs who have come in over the years and tried to help. And so the first instance of this was in 2005, when this politician came and he handed out grants to groups of women. And women, to get the money, gathered really quickly. But once the money was distributed, the groups dissipated. And so no lasting change came from this other than, momentary relief. And it wasn't until an NGO called Maasai Women's Development Organization, or MWEDO, came that sustainable change took place. It was started by 3 Maasai women interested in empowering women. They established in Lake Isamba's village literacy classes and financial empowerment to registered groups. Women now have access to bank accounts and bank accounts and microloans and emotional and financial support during emergencies and business advice. And so here is Lake Isamba talking about it in her own words. Okay, and so obviously there's been a lot of positive change happening in the area really rapidly, like over the last 3 years, incredible change. But there's still a couple, there's hurdles left to be crossed. So first of all, there's a problem with livestock. Over the years, the groups found it really difficult to recollect the microloans that they were giving out to the women, because with such big need within the families, women were spending it faster than they could reinvest it in their businesses. And then also men were reluctant to allow their wives to go to these groups because there was such little visible benefit of them attending these meetings or these classes, even by MWEDO. And so the groups started buying young livestock and giving it to the women. And then the women would sell it. So for example, they would buy like 3 young female cows, and those cows would be rotated throughout the women until each woman had a calf from that cow. And then depending on when they sell the calf, they can get hundreds of US dollars. It's an incredibly lucrative process, especially relative to how much money they're making, which is often, $5 to $10 a week with their personal businesses. But the issue is that women aren't able to herd, buy, or sell or trade the cattle because it's a men exclusive process. So women are relying on men for their welfare and security and access to their investments, which makes it really difficult and impossible for many women with reluctant husbands to join us, in which case it's an interesting question of, pride and tradition with a sense of like necessity and survival. And then even though there's a lot of changes yet to be made, women like Lakey Somber are still really optimistic. I wish that the groups had been here when I was married. We're too old now, but with the groups, we've helped our children. She has a lot of hope for the next generation. And I wanted to end it with her talking a little bit about this.
Mana ewe na bashari yangai niredi harasin jara dasarino usia yenga ube rogiaja amuba kana ganda na bulo ilawa lago de ngani na mona dasari elbaga ga balla obana enarna la yangai omerna la ranja dasari ada munyala la yara dasaro huru be wo be halene bini sangare nene bini ngar mabari awawi ni yangai.
And with that, I'm done. You can watch the rest of the video online at the Pulitzer Center or Global Citizen. Anyway, thank you guys.
Well, thank you all. That was wonderful. Let's see. We have questions. And actually, Sydney, we're going to pull up a chair right there. Oh, sure. You don't know. Okay, so let's just put it next to Diana. Yeah. Okay, and I'll give you all this. Okay, here we go.
There? Okay, cool. This question is for Diana and Rebecca. So when you're speaking of the resources that you should have in place before you get to a country, what resources are you talking about? Like, what things do you think should be in place before you get there?
Definitely understand what it is you're going to get. Make sure that you have interviews set up in advance. You know who your fixer is. You know, what am I going here for? Because so much of traveling is kind of like, oh, like, it can be really fun to show up to a place and be like, what are we getting into today? And it is an adventure, but it needs to have a lot more structure than that, and understanding like these are the things that we're hitting on these days, because scrambling on your feet like that it can be really difficult and you can miss out on some important stuff.
You answered that beautifully. Well done.
Thank you. And then Megan. And make sure, I might have turned it off.
This question is for Julia. So marginalized people in the US have generally like a lower health status. In specific, or in particular, I know that trans men and women often like buy hormones in the black market, or nothing's covered by insurance, and consequently they can have like health problems associated with that. So I was wondering if it seemed like an interesting like acceptance and rejection of the trans community in Thailand. And I was wondering if you could comment on that and health.
Yes. So that's exactly kind of what I was trying to get at, is that Thai culture is it seems like a complete contradiction in a sense, with being accepted and being rejected. And to comment on the hormones, which are really interesting, is that in Thailand, you can buy, so the hormones that you usually take when you're 15 and beginning to make the transition is just birth control, and you don't need a prescription for that. It's widely available in all pharmacies, and so there's essentially no black market. However, I will say that there is a black market for the surgical procedures. While Thailand is regarded as the sex change capital of the world, it began in the 1970s, and the surgical process in that industry used to be accommodating to a lot of Thai people, but over the years, as tourists have kind of invaded the area and things like that, prices have gone up, which means that Thai people themselves cannot afford the surgeries anymore. So they're not getting the well-regarded healthcare that they should get when they're going through an extremely complicated process such as a sex change, which requires, it's about a 14-hour procedure. It's very complex. And so they do end up going to these black market places where I tried to get in on one, but it fell through at the last minute, unfortunately. But essentially, the surgeon is not certified, and he's basically doing the surgery on the third floor of a random clinic, quote unquote, a clinic. And there's like a dish, someone said that there was a dish, blanking on the word, a dishwasher next to the surgery. Like, it's not a safe, and there's no sort of clean practices there. And because of that, there are a lot of complications to that. And then eventually, this is kind of, I hope I'm answering your question, it's a very long-winded answer, but after they get this surgery in this black market, they have complications, they go to sex work to get the money that they need because they can't get money from regular employment, that being like as a lawyer or in formal society. They get into sex work, and then they go back to the well-regarded clinics to kind of get it fixed. So yeah, that answers your question.
This one's for Sydney. Thanks for your videos, they're really good. So I just wanted to play like devil's advocate, and I was just wondering what your thoughts on this were. In terms of sustainable development, and it seems really great that these women are empowered by some of these classes that they have. Do you think that actually gives them also an extra burden? Because you had mentioned there's like unpaid housework as well as like other unpaid activities that they're forced into by that society. Do you think that that layered, like that formal economy that they're entering through these like NGOs, et cetera, do you think that kind of doubles their work, if that makes sense? And the transition should be kind of like recognizing unpaid work as well, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I've never thought about that. Thank you so much. I guess my initial reaction is, it's like, yes, women have a lot of work. And like you saw about the older woman I have, she has a granddaughter who lives with her and does a lot of the work, and does a lot of the work for her and does a lot of the household chores. But I agree that it is, and here's the deal too, because a lot of men in some places, not where I was, they are starting to reduce their amount of work and putting more of the burden on the women to make income. And so you have this transitioning from like women to be the main breadwinners in the family that wasn't there beforehand. And it's not necessarily happening where I was, but it's happening elsewhere, which does make it very difficult for women because I don't know. The community aspect, I think women fetch firewood for each other and help get water for each other when there's like times of need, all the time actually, like whenever someone has a kid, which is quite often, or their neighbor's sick or something like that. But I don't know, I don't think the NGOs are talking about that. I met with Wayo and we had a quite long discussion, and I think their main concern is getting women rights in the first place, because until recently, Maasai women were considered they weren't considered smart. I've read in a paper that they were, considered to have like an elementary school like intelligence level, and so women are gaining land rights and access to livestock, which is brand new, and so they are gaining independence in a lot of ways. But yeah, I think there's an extra burden that comes along with that.
Kara, and then John, and then it'll probably be time to wrap it up.
Hi there. I really enjoyed your presentations, and especially the technology, which are really intriguing to me. For Diana and Rebecca, you drew a causal connection between technology, cell phones, and loss of culture. I'm just wondering what evidence you have to draw that causal connection. And then for Anna, you mentioned, like how in some ways, like the Irish are definitely need some kind of revitalization process. And so like, I'm wondering if you know of some things that are being done to revitalize it. Like in particular, I think about the work that Kevin Scannell is doing with Indigenous tweets. He presented at South by Southwest a couple of years ago, and he said that Twitter is actually helping to revitalize the use of Gaelic and also, well, Irish, right? Yeah. And so I'm wondering if you came across some of those things that are being used, especially by young people.
Sure. So UNICEF reports that illiteracy rates in Indigenous communities in Costa Rica are 6 times higher than illiteracy rates across the country, and they also report that dropout rates of Indigenous communities, including the Bribri, are in the top dropout rates of different communities. I think it was like the second highest dropout rates. And these numbers relate directly back to the time when technology was starting to be introduced into communities such as the Bribri. So while there hasn't been a particular study done linking technology and loss of culture together, experts such as Dr. Marcus Guerrera, who is a professor at University of Costa Rica, as well as a woman who, Adelia Caravaca, who is an Indigenous lawyer and peace activist. It's a hefty name to say. She also links this influx of technology to the time that those numbers started spiking so clearly. And then of course, they're disinterested. And so then of course there's the community leaders who can give us the exact numbers of since 2010, only 1 or 2 students have graduated from school, and 2010 is right around when they claim technology started to really infiltrate. Part of something that I don't think we mentioned is that Bribri culture at age 12, you get to decide whether or not to go to school. And so it's this interesting fact is that, you know, legally, they are required to go to school all the way to 18 by Costa Rica law, but by Bribri culture, they are only required until age 12. So previously, before 2010, most students would continue to go after age 12, but now they are not. And so, no, it's not a direct link, but it's a correlation that many people have been seeing over the past 5 years.
And you should follow up later with Kara, because her project's also on technology in Mexico.
We should chat. As far as technology, I didn't hear much about Twitter specifically, but one big thing that did come up, other than TG Car, which is the TV station that's all in Irish, there are these 2-week summer programs that you can do in the Gaeltacht areas, and a lot of people, even if they don't have any Irish, they'll go to these over the summer. And for some people, this is where they really fall in love with the language. Some of the people I spoke with didn't know any Irish or very little other than what was in classrooms, and they'd go on these summer programs, and that's where they really learned it. But a big thing that's coming out of these summer programs are translated YouTube videos for popular songs, any song that you could hear on Top 40, because a lot of the problems that people were drawing was that, people want to listen to Top 40, which is oftentimes British music or American music, and it's all in English. And so they don't, and you don't want to push English out. It's not about rejecting English, of course. But so one way that they've done this is they'll do programs where they translate the songs into Irish and then make music videos with the kids. And they're wildly popular, millions and millions of views on YouTube. So that's a big one. Also, there is an Irish Language Week celebration, which I believe is in April. And one of the big things that they did there was they had SpongeBob translated to Irish, and it was available. It was available on the same day that the English one came out, which is huge because typically if it is in Irish, it's translated later. And that was a big thing that came up. Really, the want for it to be normal to speak Irish, kind of quote unquote tokenistic thing that a lot of people said it was, and it shouldn't be this afterthought. Oh, we also have to provide that in Irish. It should be just normal to be in a pub and talk to one person in English, talk to the other person in Irish, and if you can get Irish to be that level of normalcy, a lot of people say that kids growing up with it then won't see it as this side thing just for school. It'll be a real part of their lives. So.
And one quick question.
Yeah, my question is for Anna. So I know historically some revitalization efforts have been done kind of under the veil of like a common Celtic culture together with Scots and Welsh and Manx people. So I was wondering if you encountered anyone who kind of had like that greater pan-Celtic identity.
It really only came up, I think, not in the language, but more in like Gaelic culture as a whole. That's when Gaelic is really used as a term. So like the Gaelic Athletic Association is huge. So like sports is a big place where it would come up. And that kind of crosses more borders. I didn't talk to anyone who spoke about the languages specifically, other than a couple of scholars I spoke with at Trinity College in Dublin, because of the 6 Celtic languages, I believe 2 of them are completely dead. And so it also kind of gives them this push for, we can't let all of these languages die. And so I think there is some solidarity in that. But not anyone who's specifically talking about it today. So.
Okay, well, thank you. I've been very impressed by everyone here today, so thank you so much. We will meet again at the Cosmos Club at 6:30. Try to be on time because the food is very good. And if you are going to be at